Good afternoon. Hello, hello. I hope that everybody is doing well, and I hope everybody had a wonderful holiday. Um, I just wanted to say hi and come on here and just read from this book called Shop Class as Soulcraft. I think that the passage that I'm going to be reading today, many of you will probably get a lot out of. But in the meantime, let me just double check and make sure that I'm coming through loud and clear. As you know, I don't have anybody helping me, so I am on my own. JP isn't even here. So there we go. Sounds like I'm doing good. Let me get over to some of these other channels and go live. Awesome. Um, okay, looks like we are doing well. Good. Okay. Okay, you just heard me. All right, let me put on the chat and let a few people come on in. So make sure you come in and say hi. I will be sharing our email if you guys want to email me and ask me any questions or keep in touch somehow, because as you know, this is our last Friday reading. And of course, we're doing the Friday reading on a Saturday because yesterday we were really busy and I didn't have a lot of time to set aside to do this. So I said, why not? We'll just make the Friday reading for a Saturday. So if you're tuning in on Rockfin, hello. If you are tuning in on Facebook, hello. This is the last Friday reading. So be sure to reach out to me at info@book-of-hours.com to find out where you can watch us. You can watch us still on YouTube. We're still doing pretty good on YouTube. Lately, our the things that we've been talking about on YouTube haven't been controversial enough that YouTube has felt that they needed to remove our channel. So I'm just going to tweet that people can join me on YouTube. So we have a couple of YouTube channels. I've got a Rockfin channel and a Rumble channel. It's called Book of Hours. As you know, Facebook will be going away at the end of this year. JP and I will probably do a farewell broadcast on December 31st, just letting our followers on Facebook know where they can find us. And we've received some comments and some questions about why we are choosing to abandon Facebook or shut the whole system down. um, at least shut down the Book of Hours footprint and our personal pages off of Facebook. I think it's just run its course. I think for us personally, it's really run its course. We are so deeply embedded in our community here. There's so much going on in the community that we just feel that our time would be better served doing face-to-face things that would really benefit the locals. Plus, we were concerned about the new terms of service on Facebook and all of the Meta brands. So we are leaving Instagram, uh, Facebook. We're not on WhatsApp, but if we were, we would be leaving that as well. So we're concerned about the new policy. We don't agree with it. We just feel that our presence on Facebook as creatives would be put to feed the language learning models in AI. And we are just, that's kind of where we draw the line. I mean, Facebook came out of, all social media and including Twitter and including TikTok probably and Instagram and everything. It all came out of military models. So, when you begin with that, it's kind of, it makes you feel really uncomfortable, but it was branded as social media. And then social media then has been rebranded into scraping and searching out your content, whatever it is that you put on these social media sites, for language learning models for artificial intelligence. So, and that's kind of like, okay, it was already a behavioral algorithm. It was already a behavioral modification program. It was already um, a surveillance program. So all of these things adding up just made us feel really uncomfortable. And then I think the straw that broke it was when it left its idea, or its sort of fake idea, that it was social media, and it turned into language learning models and artificial intelligence, and ways to assimilate human feelings and human thoughts and human interaction, assimilate that into AI models. Then it just became like, well, why do I exist? You know, as a human being, I don't think I exist to feed into artificial intelligence. I mean, that is not why I'm here. So you get into these really philosophical discussions about social media and the new model that it's embracing. It's no longer, again, it's no longer about connections. It's no longer about um, social media. It's really just about scraping media and then feeding it into a language model program that will serve artificial intelligence. And I just feel like it's a really bad episode of The Simpsons, like, or a bad episode of The Twilight Zone, where, it's like, oh, they're going to put us on the spaceship and lead us to freedom or something, and then they find out that the cookbook is really just how to cook people. Like, I feel that that's what social media is, and I feel that all of the platforms are like that, not just Facebook, not just the meta brands, but Twitter, now known as X, as well, and probably eventually Blue Sky, and definitely Instagram, and all of them. And I just feel like it's time to you know move on from that fantasy that it's really about getting your stuff out there and getting seen, and making sure that your message reaches people and all this. It's never our job on this platform to try to influence people, like what to think or how to behave or what to do in their life. Honestly, I'm at this place where, whatever someone has decided that they want to do to themselves, to their children, to their family, whatever, that's their choice. And, as I may disagree with it, but my platform doesn't exist to teach them a lesson or lecture to them or even inform them. This platform was never about that. This brand, Book of Hours, was never about that. And it was certainly never, we certainly didn't create it to feed language learning models to move into artificial intelligence. I think more and more people are starting to wise up to these platforms like Twitter or X or Facebook or Instagram or even Signal or Telegram or some of these other communications networks that seem to come out of really suspect origins. Like, I was under the impression Telegram was a CIA, a communications network. Just as easily as we understand that Facebook came out of, what was it, DARPA log or something like that, or log life or something. I mean, it was a military program for military people to communicate, and connect. And then it was branded to us as social media and sold to us as a way to connect with grandma or something, or your college roommate. And it's really not that. So one of the things I want to do before I read the piece that I'm going to read from this book, which is called Shop Class as Soulcraft. First of all, this book has a history. JP had it, he read it, he gave it away, and then he was like, I want to read it again. So he got it again, and he started reading it again. And he told me today, when we were out and about yesterday and during this holiday break, I said, I don't know what to read. And he said, why don't you read a piece from this book, Shop Class as Soulcraft? It's great. And read the chapter that starts with The separation of thinking from doing. So the separation of thinking from doing. Before I do that though, I want to talk about something that some of you may know about, some of you may not know about. Some of you may be very keen on this and have uh, made comments about this, but it's about the breakup. It's about a breakup. It's about the breakup of Elon Musk and Trump. So Musk and Trump are going through a rough patch, like all relationships do. So what happened was, gosh, how do I phrase this and keep it light, but also like kind of drive home the underpinnings of it. So it's really about something called the H-1B visa. And I'm against it. I'm against the H-1B visa. I think that's what it is, right? Let me just double check. I'm against it. Yeah, it's the H-1B visa. If you don't know what it is, it's a temporary visa that allows U.S. employers to hire foreign workers in specialty occupations. Sounds pretty. It kind of sounds like the American way. I mean, we're constantly doing that, right? Well, much of what you're going to hear me talk about regarding this is speculation, is opinion, and maybe a little fact is mingled in there somewhere. And the fact is based on personal stories or anecdotal stories. So I believe that just like with COVID, and just like with climate, and just like with DEI, and just like with any other type of issue that is fabricated, if a corporation follows a certain rule, or they develop contracts. They have contracts with the government in order to fulfill certain obligations, and they get a kickback. They get a kickback in the form of funding, right, for their company. So just like with COVID, hey, look, implement a mask policy, implement a contact tracing policy where you make your employees take a test every day to make sure that they're still human, or they're not human, or they have a virus, or they don't have a virus, or whatever, and we'll give you a kickback for that. Okay. Just like with climate models as well. Hey, are you a climate friendly corporation? You are? Great. We'll give you this little sticker that says you're climate approved, and then we'll also fund you. We'll give you, we'll allocate a certain amount of funding to you. So it's these corporations that are working with the government hand in glove to um, stay afloat, to stay relevant in the economy, because the economy is no longer based on consumerism, and it's kind of sort of barely based on capitalism anymore. And you know this if you have been watching any of our video essays that we have produced over the last 4 years. You know that our position right here at Book of Hours is one that says capitalism is fading out, consumerism is fading out, and we're entering into Nazism, or a brand of Nazism, or fascism. Okay, so let's go back to the H-1B visa discussion, which is what sort of made this relationship between Trump and Musk implode. So just like with every other model, if you sign up a certain amount of H-1B visa workers, the government will give you a kickback. Now, these H-1B visa workers are historically not up to the corporate task for the jobs for which they are placed in. Okay, case in point, I am very intimately related to someone. I won't say if it's my husband or not. Um, with someone who basically works with an H-1B visa individual, and that individual produces garbage designs and garbage work. That individual is feckless and lazy, never attends meetings, never participates in the things that he's supposed to participate in order to have this job. And he let his visa expire. Now, in the old days, in the pre-Biden maybe days, maybe even the pre-Obama days, if you brought in an employee who let their visa expire. I'm going to turn the light a little bit. That employee would be fired. They would simply be, security would go to their desk and say, okay, you're done. You let your visa expire. You are now working for this American company illegally. We cannot, we will be fined by the government, so you must go. And don't call us, we'll call you, kind of thing. Don't bother reapplying for the job. You're out. And they would be out of a job. Well, in this particular case, not only did the worker, the H-1B visa worker, let his visa expire, and then he was like, well, I guess I have to go to my home country, which is Australia, to renew the visa. He was told, you can't work, but you'll still get a paycheck. Because in this system that we're in, where capitalism and consumerism don't mean anything, it's important for the corporation to show the government that they still have a certain amount of foreign workers under this classification of H-1B on their little spreadsheet and on their little report. So at the end of every quarter, they can hand it over to the government, and the government can go, oh, I see that you have, all these people that you have brought on through the H-1B status. Here's your $50 million in funding. Okay, so they keep him on the payroll, but he can't work. So not only is he not working, he is getting a paycheck. And so he has to be participating in a project. So if he's not participating in the project, that means the project isn't getting complete. So who has to complete the project? Somebody like my relative has to come in, and he makes less money than the H-1B visa person does, right? Who is still on the payroll but not working. And he has to do the person's work, but the H-1B visa guy, he gets all the credit because it's his project. So that's the problem I have with the H-1B visa. This is a personal story. This is an anecdotal story that isn't, I'm sure that it's not a very common occurrence. I don't know if you guys understand sarcasm, but I'm pretty sure in the corporate world that this is how things run. This is how things run. It's through deceit, it's through lies. And of course, there is a record number of these individuals who are placed in these tech companies for the sole purpose of the tech companies getting funding. That's it. There's no other purpose for them. They lie on their CVs, which is a resume. They lie. They claim that they have all of the credentials and all of the talent that is expected of them, and they don't have it. They break the rules. They don't attend meetings. They let their visas expire. They do everything that you're not supposed to do, and they still get a paycheck because the government and the corporations are working together to make sure that the funding is still moving forward, right? So, and also it has to do with contracts with stakeholders who are like, look, if your company isn't getting the kind of funding that we have invested in, then we're going to pull out of the investment in your company. We're no longer going to have a stake in your company. So I'm not saying that everything hangs in the balance on these H-1B visa holders. I'm not saying that that's the case, but I'm saying it's a large part of it. So Elon Musk came out yesterday, I believe it was, and he said he was pro H-1B visa, and everybody can just go F themselves if they don't agree with him. This is the hill he will die on. And he basically showed his apartheid, authoritarian, fascist roots to everybody. And so did Vivek Ramaswamy. Now, Vivek Ramaswamy and Elon Musk started up something on Twitter. It only exists on Twitter. It's not really a real thing, called the Department of Government Efficiency. And the Department of Government Efficiency claimed that it was going to root out wasteful spending in the government. Well, one of the first things that it should have rooted out was these visa programs, which exist only to fund corporations. But the problem is the very corporations that they're invested in and the very corporations that they front, like Tesla or SpaceX, or especially in Ramaswamy's case, where he has all sorts of economic interest in like mRNA technology and the pharmaceutical companies. And all of these in insurance companies and all these places are notorious for hiring these individuals through these visa programs. um, they were like, uh-oh. So they started a Department of Government Efficiency um, trend, and it was only on Twitter. It wasn't anything real. It's not like it was a real, it doesn't even have like a website. It's not a real department that even existed. It was just this idea that they were going to try to convince the Trump cabinet to bring into the new administration during this process of moving out of the Biden administration and moving into the Trump administration. They wanted to, make sure that the government was run efficiently and that funding was called what taxpayer money that would translate to funding corporations or funding agencies within the government would not be exorbitant. Like, this was all about making sure that taxpayers weren't hurt by all this. Well, it just so happens that one of the worst ways that taxpayers are hurt is that these fraudulent visa programs are created for the government to fund corporations. And so this whole Department of Government Efficiency idea, it kind of blew up in their face because people were like, well, what about the visa issue? What about the fact that, you know, you get these workers that are making a lot of money coming in. They don't know what they're doing at their engineering jobs or their designer jobs or their tech jobs. And it's elbowing out, really qualified American workers who can't seem to get hired. What about the lack of efficiency and the fraud that's going on with that? Well, they pushed back so hard, and instead of saying, "Oh yeah, we'll look into it," which is pretty much the corporate way, just to get people to shut up, instead, Vivek Ramaswamy and Elon Musk turned around and said, "Oh, this is the hill we're going to die on. We benefited from these visa programs, and as God is my witness, we're not going to let those go. And they're the best thing that ever happened. And oh, and by the way, all of you Americans, especially you MAGA, you all suck. You're lazy, you're stupid, you're feckless, and you should all just die." That's basically what Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy announced publicly on their Twitter feeds. And it shocked, like, there was this huge shakeup in the universe last night because of this. It was unbelievable to see this meltdown. I've never seen anything like it. It was unbelievable. And I think that the more I thought about it this morning, the more I realized that it comes down to it almost comes down to one person, and that person is Steve Bannon. Steve Bannon has always been tight with the Trump campaign, and he's always been a champion for MAGA, which is the Make America Great Again people who operate outside of Democrats, outside of Republicans. MAGA are their own brand. Okay. And Steve Bannon has sort of been leading the charge. So the story, I think, goes something like this, and this is where I speculate, that Steve Bannon had a meeting with Trump and said, you need to get rid of Ramaswamy and you need to get rid of Elon Musk. I know that they have been influential in bringing people to the campaign and bringing people to you. But the fact is they want to destroy America from within. Look at what's happening in San Francisco. They want to continue to use these visa programs in order to finance their personal interests. And there's something darker and more sinister about these two in particular, because Elon Musk especially comes out of, and this is me taking over, I don't think Bannon actually went here. And if he did it privately. He never talks about this publicly. But Elon Musk comes from, he benefited from, as a Generation X, he benefited from apartheid in South Africa. And so did Peter Thiel. And so did David Sachs. And these are, the triad of apartheid dudes. And they're also the three people that started PayPal, which none of us actually need PayPal, by the way. And nor do we need Tesla, and nor do we need SpaceX. Okay. And I think that that's where Steve Bannon was kind of going. If you allow these billionaires with their private interests and their backgrounds understanding how apartheid works, they have a deep contempt for the bread and butter, the the sort of the patriots of the United States of America. They have a deep contempt for people like me. They have, and this is me talking, and Steve Bannon as well. He understands this. Elon Musk, David Sachs, probably Vivek Ramaswamy, and Peter Thiel, they hate regular working class Americans. They hate poor people. They come straight out of apartheid, where racism and classism and putting people in their place is what gave them their power. It's what gave them their money and put them in their positions. So they're bringing apartheid, in my opinion, they're bringing some sort of weird digital apartheid to the United States. And I think Steve Bannon put his finger to the wind, and he saw all the people that were concerned about an unelected agency meddling in our government systems and our government programs, threatening to take away certain programs that people might need in order to make the government run more efficiently. No, this was all to benefit billionaires. And Steve Bannon was like, if you do this, Trump, if you let these guys in and you do this dumb Doge thing or this Department of Government Efficiency thing, you are going to go down in history as the guy who basically reinvented apartheid, reinvented Nazism, maybe he reinvented Hitler, and all those rumors that the Democrats say about you, which is that you're the second coming of Hitler. It will be true if you let Ramaswamy and Musk and all of their Silicon Valley bros and tech bros and interests flood through the gates of the United States government. There's got to be, there has to be a moment where we close the door on that and say, enough. Enough with surveillance capitalism. Enough with this obsession over artificial intelligence and this demeaning of human life. Enough with that. Because Elon Musk and Ramaswamy specifically went hard after working class Americans. It was disgusting to see their true nature come out. Now, I'm sure it's all part of the game. Okay, if you take an even broader step back and you look at it from that, 50,000-foot viewpoint, I'm sure that it's all part of the process, and that their handler said, okay, now's the time that you're going to send this really horrible tweet, which shows you're breaking with MAGA and you're breaking with the working class. Laura Loomer was also involved. Laura Loomer probably had a sit down with Steve Bannon, who said, hey, look, this is how it's going to go down. Okay. You're going to send a tweet that says that Elon Musk is the gateway to Silicon Valley taking over the government. This is what all of the base is saying anyway. They're very uncomfortable with Elon Musk being so close to Trump. I've taken the pulse of MAGA Americans. It's not a good thing. So you're our gal. You're gonna be the one that launches the one tweet, and it's gonna kill you. You're gonna die. You're going to lose your income. You're going to lose your blue check on Twitter. You're going to lose your reputation. But don't worry, you can come work for me at the War Room. That's the conversation I think that Steve Bannon had with Laura Loomer. So Laura Loomer puts out a tweet that says, oh my gosh, Elon Musk is the guy that we should not trust. He's embedded deep with Silicon Valley and all the tech bros, and Silicon Valley is going to take over our government. And right on cue, Elon Musk shattered her, took away all of her income stream, made it so she couldn't even get back into her own account. Not Elon Musk, but the ex engineers, okay, probably at his direction or at his handler's direction. And she lost everything, but not to worry, she will be okay. I have a feeling that we'll be seeing her in other venues in time, probably after the inauguration. So it started with that. So there's always one thing that kind of pivots us into this new place. We're looking at a transition out of the Biden administration and into the Trump administration. And so there will always be those uncomfortable moments. There might be a breakup between two people that were once allied, like Musk and Trump. Um, there might be other things that come along that are really shocking and um, really upsetting to, especially to the MAGA people. But this is all part of the process. It's all part of the transition process. There's always something, right? There's always some kind of big controversy. So I think when you're looking at Steve Bannon, what you're looking at is a very interesting character. So Trump's advisor, obviously, probably still, at least during the 2016 election, and then probably still in some way, maybe not officially, in some way and in some capacity, he still is the Trump advisor. Um, so I think that that's why we're having this little breakdown between Silicon Valley and the Trump administration. Um, and I think that Steve Bannon's recent stint where he had to go to jail for I think it was 6 months or 9 months or something. It was a long time. I felt like it was a long time. They're saying that it's because of his involvement in the story of the hoax event from January 6th, 2021, which I have no qualms. Like everybody at this point, I think knows it was a hoax. But the Justice Department or the people that sent him to prison and made him do his time said, you're doing your time and you're going to prison because of your involvement in the January 6th event. I really think, because if you look at the timing of this and when he was sentenced and when he was in jail, and what happens when you're in jail? You can't talk, you can't speak, you don't have any influence in the outside world. During the time that Steve Bannon was in jail, suddenly Peter Thiel, David Sachs, Vivek Ramaswamy, Elon Musk, and a whole bunch of other Silicon Valley tech interests had flooded the airwaves. I mean, they were all over the place, mainstream media, social media. And I think that in a way that they're the reason that Steve Bannon was in jail, because one of the things that Steve Bannon did, which really hurt their bottom line, is he exposed the Pfizer documents. So Pfizer wanted to keep the documents which showed their adverse events or adverse effects, or even the death count, or the fact that women were going through a record number of reproductive issues as a result of taking the Pfizer shot. It was Steve Bannon who funded and sourced and pulled teams together to research these documents, which Pfizer wanted to keep under wraps for 75 years. He immediately went to court and made sure that those documents were released to his team of investigators and researchers and doctors and analysts and scientists. And so this information was then made for the public, so the public could see all of the damage that the Pfizer shots did. Now, you don't do something like that if you're Steve Bannon. You don't do something like that and expect to just, go lay in a hammock and sip a Mai Tai. No, the people that were directly benefiting from the Pfizer shot were the tech industry. It was the number one industry that made the most money out of the whole COVID lockdown, contact tracing, testing. Okay, that industry made more money in those few years than they've made practically since the invention, since the rollout of Silicon Valley in, like, I want to say like the 80s or something, or the 70s or 80s, right? More money in those few years. So you don't do something like what Steve Bannon did, where he basically showed all of the adverse effects and all of the devastation that, you know, individuals were experiencing as a result of all of this, without getting your hand slapped. I mean, he kind of fell on his sword. I'm not going to get all patriotic about this, but he kind of fell on his sword for the American people. And I think that's why he went to jail. I think that the Silicon Valley tech bros and their billions of dollars were able to buy off judges and buy off court systems. And so even though the media will frame it, oh, Steve Bannon is going to jail because of this, January 6th thing, I think the real reason that they threw him in jail was to shut him the fuck up, because they were like, shut your mouth. This is our bread and butter. And he was exposing everything through this 3,500 or 5,000 network of volunteers that were working day and night to bring forth information that would interest the American people. I mean, you can't get more, like, I'm not trying to lift the man up as some kind of deity, but my God, and I feel like what's happening is that this business of Musk and Trump kind of breaking apart and breaking up, I think he's behind it. I think he took Trump aside and said, this is not good. You do not want these people in your cabinet. You do not want these people anywhere near your cabinet. No. So that's what's going on. We have a breakup, a shakedown, whatever, between Musk and Trump. We've got investigators that are looking into these really fraudulent visa programs that are finding out some crazy information about where the money's going and how it's being spent. There are so many personal anecdotal stories that I could relay to you from the person that I'm related to, who happens to work with people from other countries who are working with him, and they're on a visa. We'll just say that. There are all sorts of stories, and the number one consistency with these types of workers is that they are underqualified, and that's putting it lightly. They lie and they use deceitful practices in order to convince an agent, a federal agent, or in order to convince a corporation that they're qualified for something that they are simply not qualified for. And so it's personally affecting my life because this family member can't. Well, he's worked for the same company for almost 3 years. He's never had a raise. He doesn't get paid for holidays. If he doesn't work, he doesn't get paid, and he has to clean up the mess from the visa workers who don't know what they're doing. He's kind of like the fix-it guy, and he gets paid less. They're like, okay, so now we have this pile of garbage that these, visa workers created. Now we need you, who understands systems and systems thinking, and what's expected, and what's expected of the product. We need you to fix it. That's just, and it's like you could have avoided this entire mess by just going straight to the person who's got the 25 plus year career and having him design from the beginning. Like, what in the world are you thinking? So this is a recurring issue. Okay, there's so much stuff that people don't know about that goes on in the corporate sectors, and a lot of our listeners and a lot of our followers, I kind of get the feeling that they've never, like, worked in the corporate world, that they don't know how toxic and deceitful it really is. I mean, it's so bad that one of the VPs just got murdered, right? Or sorry, CEOs just got murdered, right? So that's how bad it is. All right. So when we're talking about like somebody like Steve Bannon, who's all about, hey, let me put my money where my mouth is, he's the one that said, there's no way, not on my watch, are we going to let Pfizer sit on these documents for 75 years. I will leverage, my own savings and my own retirement. I will do whatever it takes. I will dance on a fucking pin and I will even go to jail to make sure that this information gets out and do whatever I have to do. So he puts his money where his mouth is. So I've not read this chapter yet. I don't know if my thoughts about it are exactly in line with what it's saying, but it's called the separation of thinking from doing. So there's one thing to actually think it and say, boy, it sure would be nice if somebody could get that information out about Pfizer, even though they want it hidden for 70 years. The end. No, it's actually like, boy, it would be nice if this could happen. Let's make it happen. Let's do it. So the separation of thinking from doing. The dichotomy of mental versus manual didn't arise spontaneously. Rather, the 20th century saw concerned efforts to separate thinking from doing. Those efforts achieved a good deal of success in ordering our economic life. And it is this success that perhaps explains the plausibility the distinction now enjoys. Yet to call this success is deeply perverse, for wherever the separation of thinking from doing has been achieved, it has been responsible for the degradation of work. If we can understand the process by which so many jobs get fragmented, we will be better able to recognize those areas of work that have resisted the process and identify jobs in which the human capacities may be fully engaged. In the 1950s, sociologists started pointing out a basic resemblance between Soviet and Western societies. In both, there seemed to be an increasing number of jobs that were radically simplified. Both societies were industrial and had in common a growing separation of planning from execution. This was sometimes attributed to automation, but more penetrating observers noted that it proceeded from the imperatives of rational administration, a sort of social technology rooted in the division of labor. The machine in question was the social body made up of increasingly standardized parts. And in the Soviet bloc, this machine was subject to central control by the state, and in the West, by corporations. So if you go back and you remember what I said at the beginning, where Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy and various others were saying we need to keep these visa programs in place, and we established that the visa programs are not about consumerism and it's not about bringing forth good talent into the companies that employ them, and it's not even about capitalism, but rather it's about these individuals who run these companies getting funding from the government in order to stay afloat, in order to stay relevant. So, what is that when the government is straight funding private corporations? What is that? How is that defined? That is communism. So what I'm saying here is that with Elon Musk and Peter Thiel and David Sachs's background and how they achieved their famous status and all of their money was through apartheid in South Africa. What I'm saying is that that is the model that they want to integrate into the United States. That model, that communist model or even fascist model or Nazist like model that does not benefit anybody. It doesn't benefit the visa workers who are underpaid and kicked around. And it certainly doesn't benefit American workers who aren't even getting the jobs. It's only benefiting the government and the corporations. And that's where I'm going with this. I don't want to turn this into a, oh, I'm against, visa programs and I'm against undocumented workers because da 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 da. No, this is about how the corporations and the government are working together, and they're using these corrupted visa programs in order to achieve a goal, and that goal will not benefit you or me. In 1974, Harry Braverman published his masterpiece of economic reflection, Labor and Monopoly Capital: The Degradation of Work in the 20th Century. Braverman was an avowed Marxist. With the Cold War now safely decided, we may consider anew, without a sense of mortal political threat, the Marxian account of alienated labor. As Braverman acknowledged, this critique applied to the Soviet Union no less than to capitalist societies. He gives a richly descriptive account of the degradation of many different kinds of work. In doing so, he offers nothing less than an explanation of why we are getting more stupid with every passing year, which is to say, the degradation of work is ultimately a cognitive matter, rooted in the separation of thinking from doing. I would also like to talk a little bit about the degradation of like society through Elon Musk and his programs and all the business model by which they want to continue to move forward and how they define success. It is antithetical to human life. They want to define the success of the United States based on some sort of economic model. And somebody like Steve Bannon, or somebody even like me, who is the complete opposite spectrum that Steve Bannon is on, we define the success of a country, whether it's American or any country, we define that success by enlightenment, by passion, creativity, uh, moving into civic spaces and developing relationships. And all of the economic success will come as a result of that enlightenment, that working together on a civic level, the love that you have for your community, the joy that comes as a result of the community getting together and creating an event or something. The economic success will follow. But that is not something that the technocrats like Ramaswamy and Musk and David Sachs and Peter Thiel and a whole slew of other Silicon Valley interests, that is not how they define success in a country, and especially not in the United States. They are contemptuous of what I just described. They're contemptuous of community. They're contemptuous of the poor working together to help each other. They're contemptuous of it. They want to destroy it. The degradation of blue collar work, and they're contemptuous of blue collar work. The central culprit in Braverman's account is scientific management, which enters the workplace not as the representative of science, but as the representative of management, masquerading in the trappings of science. The tenets of scientific management were given their first and frankest articulation by Frederick Winslow Taylor, whose principles of scientific management was hugely influential in the early decades of the 20th century. Stalin was a big fan, as were the founders of the first MBA program at Harvard, where Taylor was invited to lecture annually. Taylor writes, "The managers assume the burden of gathering together all the traditional knowledge, which in the past has been possessed by the workmen, and then of classifying, tabulating, and reducing this knowledge to rules, laws, and formula. Scattered craft knowledge is concentrated in the hands of the employer, then doled out again to workers in the form of minute instructions needed to perform some part of what is now a work process. This process replaces what was previously an integral activity rooted in craft, tradition, and experience, animated by the worker's own mental image of and intention toward the finished product. Thus, according to Taylor, all possible brain work should be removed from the shop and centered in the planning or laying out department. It is a mistake to suppose that the primary purpose of this partition is to render the work process more efficient. It may or may not result in extracting more value from a given unit of labor time. The concern is rather with labor cost. Once the cognitive aspects of the job are located in a separate management class, or better yet, in a process that once designed requires no ongoing judgment or deliberation, skilled workers can be replaced with unskilled workers at a lower rate of pay. And that is exactly the argument that so many people have regarding these visa programs, especially in the tech industry and Silicon Valley. That's how you have so many billionaires concentrated in Silicon Valley, because the government is funding them. And one of the rules for getting all that funding and getting so rich is that you have to bring in unskilled labor through these visa programs, thereby reducing everybody's income level, every worker's income level. This is a terrible model. Once the cognitive aspects of the job are located in a separate management class, or better yet, in a process that once designed requires no ongoing judgment or deliberation, skilled workers can be replaced with unskilled workers at a lower rate of pay. Taylor writes that the full possibilities of his system will not have realized until almost all of the machines in the shop are run by men who are of smaller caliber and attainments, and who are therefore cheaper than those required under the old system. So, what becomes of the skilled workers? Well, the naive view is that they go somewhere else. But the competitive labor cost advantage now held by the more modern firm, which has aggressively separated planning from execution, compels the whole industry to follow the same route, and entire skilled trades disappear. This craft knowledge dies out, or rather gets instantiated in a different form as process engineering knowledge. The conception of the work is remote from the worker who does it. Scientific management introduced the use of time and motion analysis to describe the physiological capabilities of the human body in machine terms. As Braverman writes, the more labor is governed by classified motions which extend across the boundaries of trades and occupants, the more it devolves, or the more it dissolves its concrete forms into the general types of work motions. This mechanical exercise of human faculties according to motion types, which are studied and independently of the particular kind of work being done, brings to life the Marxist conception of abstract labor. The clearest example of abstract labor is thus the assembly line. The activity of self-directed labor conducted by the worker is dissolved or abstracted into parts and then reconstituted as a process controlled by management, a labor sausage, so to speak. At the turn of the last century, the manufacture of automobiles was done by craftsmen recruited from bicycle and carriage shops, all around mechanics who knew what they were doing. And in the wheelwright shop, George Start relates his experience in taking over his family business of making wheels for carriages in 1884, shortly before the advent of the automobile. He had been a school teacher with literary ambitions, but now finds himself almost overwhelmed by the cognitive demands of his new trade. In Sturt's shop, working exclusively with hand tools, the skills required to build a wheel regress all the way to the selection of trees to fell for timber, the proper time for felling them, how to season them, and so forth. The two select but one minor task out of the countless he describes. Here is Sturt's account of fabricating a section of the wheel's rim called a fellow. So let me read this. Hope you guys are still with me. Thanks for staying with me during this. It's sorry, the type is a little bit different here, so let me just get in the light. Yet it is in vain to go into details at this point. For when the simple apparatus had all been gotten together for one simple looking process, a never ending series of variations was introduced by the material. What though two fellows might seem much alike when finished? It was the wheelwright himself who had to make them so. He it was who hewed out that resemblance from quite dissimilar blocks, for no two fellow blacks were ever alike, or fellow blocks were ever alike. The knots here, shakes there, windgalls, waney wedges, edges with more or less bark in them, thicknesses, thinnesses were forever affording new chances or forbidding previous solutions whereby a fresh problem confronted the workman's ingenuity every few minutes. He had no handsaw to drive with ruthless unintelligent through every resistance. The timber was far from being prey, a helpless victim to a machine. Rather, it would lend its own special virtues to the man who knew how to humor it. So I think what he was trying to say when he was working on this was that no two problems were alike, that you couldn't just assembly line the results, or you couldn't just assembly line um uh the the outcome, you know, that everything was uniquely um constructed, and then the problems that came from that construction were unique. So it took so you couldn't just fit everything into a box, right? It kind of feels like that's what he's saying. You know, the language is a little, I mean, it's dated, so, and the writing was really small, so I don't know. Given their likely acquaintance with such a cognitively rich world of work, it is hardly surprising that when Henry Ford introduced the assembly line in 1913, workers simply walked out. One of Ford's biographers wrote, "So great was labor's distaste for the new machine system that renewed, or the Okay, so great was the distaste for the new machine system that towards the close of 1913, every time the company wanted to add 100 men to its factory personnel, it was necessary to hire 963. Wow. This would seem to be a crucial moment in the history of political economy. Evidently, the new system provoked natural revulsion, yet at some point, workers became habituated to it. Now, how did this happen? One might be tempted to inquire in a typological mode. What sort of men were these first? The 100 out of the 963 who stuck it out in the new assembly line? Perhaps it was the men who felt less revulsion because they had less pride in their own powers and were therefore more tractable, less Republican, we might say. But if there was initially such a self-selection process, it quickly gave way to something more systemic. I think the lighting is off a little. Sorry if I'm super bright now, but I want to see what I'm reading. In a temporary suspension of the Taylorist logic, Ford was forced to double the daily wage of his workers to keep the line staffed. As Braverman writes, this opened up new possibilities for the intensification of labor within the plants, where workers were now anxious to keep their jobs. These anxious workers were more productive. Indeed, Ford himself later recognized his wage increase as one of the finest cost-cutting moves we ever made, as he was able to double and then triple the rate at which cars were assembled by simply speeding up the conveyors. And by doing so, he destroyed his competitors and thereby destroyed the possibility of an alternative way of working. This also removed the wage pressure that comes from the existence of more enjoyable jobs. In 1900, there were 7,632 wagon and carriage manufacturers in the United States. Adopting Ford's methods, the industry would soon be reduced to the big three. So workers eventually became habituated to the abstraction of the assembly line. Evidently, it inspires revulsion only if one is acquainted with more satisfying modes of work. Here, the concept of wages as compensation achieves its fullest meaning and its central place in modern economy. Changing attitude towards consumption seemed to play a role. A man whose needs are limited will find the least noxious livelihood and work in his substance mode, and indeed, the experience of early capitalism, where many producers worked at home on a piece rate basis, was that only so much labor could be extracted from them. Contradicting the assumptions of rational behavior, it was found that when employers would increase the piece rate in order to boost production, it actually had the opposite effect. Workers would produce less, as now they could meet their fixed needs with less work. Eventually, it was learned that the only way to get them to work harder was to play upon the imagination, stimulating new needs and wants. Consumption, no less than production, needed to be brought under scientific management, the management of desire. Thus, there came to be marketers who called themselves consumption engineers. And in the early decades of the 20th century, they were armed with the latest findings of experimental psychology. The habituation of workers to the assembly line was thus perhaps made easier by another innovation of the early 20th century: consumer debt. As Jackson Lears argued, through the installment plan, previously unthinkable acquisitions became thinkable, and more than thinkable. It became normal to carry debt. The display of a new car bought on installment became a sign that one was trustworthy. Hmm. In a wholesale transformation of the old Puritan moralism expressed by Benjamin Franklin with the motto, "Be frugal and free," the early 20th century saw the moral legitimization of spending. One symptom Lears points to is a 1907 book with the immodest title, "The New Basis of Civilization" by Simon Nelson Patent, in which the moral balance of debt and spending is reversed, and the multiplication of wants becomes not a sign of dangerous corruption, but part of the civilizing process. That is part of the disciplinary process. So, as Lears writes, indebtedness could discipline workers, keeping them at routinized jobs in factories and offices, graying but in harness, meeting payments regularly. So to play upon a desire in order to keep your workers like in debt. So the money that they do make is goes right back into the very system that they're enslaved in. Let's see here. How far along are we? A couple more pages. The degradation of white collar work. Much of the jobs of the future, sorry, much of the jobs of the future rhetoric surrounding the eagerness to end shop class and get every warm body into college, thence into a cubicle, implicitly assumes that we are heading to a post-industrial economy in which everyone will deal only in abstractions. Okay, this is exactly what's happening now. This is the argument that's going on Twitter right now, that fuck creativity, fuck the arts, fuck even shop class, and let's just throw everybody into engineering school. That's what people like Musk want. Yet trafficking in abstractions is not the same as thinking. White collar professions, too, are subject to routinization and degradation, proceeding by the same logic that hit manual fabrication 100 years ago. The cognitive elements of the job are appropriated from professionals, instantiated in a system of process, so system or process, and then handed back to a new class of workers like clerks who replace professionals. If genuine knowledge work is not growing but actually shrinking because it is coming to be concentrated in an ever smaller elite, this has implications for the vocational advice that students ought to receive. If they want to use their brains at work and aren't destined to make it into the star chamber, they should be helped to find work that somehow thwarts the Taylorist logic and is therefore safe from it. It is not always the imperatives of profit that drive the alienation of judgment from professionals. Sometimes it is a matter of public policy. Standardized tests remove a teacher's direction in the curriculum. Strict sentencing guidelines prevent a judge from judging. It seems to be our liberal political instincts that push us in this direction of centralizing authority. We distrust authority in the hands of individuals. With its reverence for neutral process, liberalism is, by design, a politics of irresponsibility. This begins with the best of intentions, securing our liberties against the abuse of power, but has become a kind of monster that feeds on individual agency, especially for those who work in the public sector. In the private sector, the monster is created by profit maximization rather than distrust of authority, but it demands a similar diet. Expert systems, a term coined by artificial intelligence researchers, were initially developed by the military for battle command, then used to replicate industrial expertise in such fields as oil well drilling and telephone line maintenance. Then they found their way into medical diagnosis and eventually the cognitively murky, highly lucrative regions of financial and legal advice. And in the electric sweatshop, how computers are transforming the office of the future into the factory of the past, Barbara Garson details how extraordinary human ingenuity has been used to eliminate the need for human ingenuity. She finds that, like Taylor's rationalization of the shop floor, the intention of expert systems is to transfer knowledge, skill, and decision making from employee to employee, while Taylor's time and motion studies broke every concrete work motion into minute parts. And so let me read this. The modern knowledge engineer performs similar detailed studies, only he atomizes decision making rather than bricklaying. So the time and motion study has become a time and thought study. To build an expert system, a living expert is debriefed and then cloned by a knowledge engineer. That is to say, an expert is interviewed, typically for weeks or months. The knowledge engineer watches the expert work on simple problems and asks exactly what factors the expert considered in making his apparently intuitive decisions. Eventually, hundreds or thousands of rules of thumb are fed into the computer. The result is a program that can make decisions or draw conclusions heuristically instead of merely calculating with equations. Like a real expert, a sophisticated expert system should be able to draw inferences from iffy or incomplete data that seems to suggest or tends to rule out. In other words, it uses and then replaces judgment. Okay, so that perfectly illustrates one of the reasons we're getting off of social media, or at least the Meta brand, is Zuckerberg has been very open about feeding the data into the large language learning models that will create artificial intelligence. And so this right here just describes that, even though they're not talking about AI at this time, when this book was written. This book here, Shop Class as Soulcraft, I highly recommend that you get it and read it. Um, I want to say that this really does pinpoint the dangers of that. Let's move on. The human expert who is cloned achieves a vast dominion and immortality. I think I'm gonna have to. Sorry, I'm getting a message here from somebody. So I'll just ignore it and delete it later. The human expert who is cloned achieves a vast dominion and immortality, in a sense. It is other experts and future experts who are displaced as expertise is centralized. This means that most people in the advice or human service business will be employed as the disseminators rather than the originators of this advice. Garson writes, in the culture of new capitalism, Richard Sennett describes such a process. Especially in the cutting edge realms of high finance, advanced technology, and sophisticated services, genuine knowledge work comes to be concentrated in an ever smaller elite. It seems we must take a cold eyed view of knowledge work and reject the image of a rising sea of pure mentation that lifts all boats. More likely is a rising sea of clerkdom. To expect otherwise is to hope for a reward in the basic logic of the modern economy, that is cognitive stratification. It is not clear to me what this hope could be based on, though if history is any guide, we have to wonder whether the excitation of such a hope has become an instrument by which young people are prepared for clerkdom in the same perverse way that the craft ideology prepared workers for the assembly line. Both provide a lens that makes the work look appealing from afar, but only by presenting an image that is upside down. This is exactly what's happening to the visa workers. I mean, I think this is also sort of another existential crisis that is uh, that everyone is experiencing, but they're not quite comprehending or understanding. So, you're dangling the carrot in front of these workers and telling them that they could have these exciting jobs with these corporations, and they're totally underqualified for them. They're given a like a 90-day like brief, where they're just like, all of this information about what their jobs will be is like dumped into their lap, and these are people that didn't go to college. They didn't certainly don't have engineering degrees. They certainly don't have like art degrees. They certainly don't understand like design and the products that they would be working on, and I'm talking tech based only. right? I'm talking systems that are just um, tech based only. And so they're also lied to. So you've got, the workers that are currently there that could produce a decent output or outcome for management that are being shoved aside and then being replaced by incompetent workers simply so that the corporation can continue to get funding from the government and check off a box that they brought in a certain amount through these visa programs. And so the people that may suffer the very most are the people that are way out of their element, and that's the workers, um, who are solicited to, they are lied to, but then they too realize that in order to get where they need to go, that they also have to lie. And it just becomes this really dysfunctional relationship and this dysfunctional partnership. And I feel like, you may not quite understand where I'm coming with this, but as you start to process the information and realize the kind of people that we're talking about, I think you'll get it. Basically, you have all of Silicon Valley is a success, and you have a billionaire like every 80 or 90 blocks in San Francisco, or at least you did at one point, as a result of this dysfunctional process, right? So the human expert who is cloned achieves a vast dominion and immortality in a sense. It is other experts and future experts who are displaced as expertise is centralized. Um, it seems we must take a cold-eyed view of knowledge work and reject the image of a rising sea of pure mentation that lifts all boats. This statement, a rising tide lifts all boats, that you often hear that in the sort of the romanticized socialist lexicon. A rising tide lifts all boats. If one succeeds, we all succeed. And it's very romanticized, but it's not realistic. It doesn't happen. Um, it is not clear to me what this hope could be based on, though if history is any guide, we have to wonder whether the excitation of such a hope has become an instrument by which young people are prepared for clerkdom. So, yeah, again, I just want to stress that I think this whole visa issue, and ironically enough, surprisingly enough, Steve Bannon is actually talking sort of on behalf of these people as well. He's concerned about the he's concerned about slavery. These people who are brought in on these visa programs are basically being used as slaves. The latest version, okay, so this section of this chapter that I'm reading is called Everyone on Einstein. The latest version of such hopeful thinking is gathered into the phrase the creative economy. In The Rise of the Creative Class, Richard Florida presents the image of the creative individual. Bizarre mavericks operating at the bohemian fringe are now at the very heart of the process of innovation, forming a core creative class in science and engineering, architecture and design, education, arts, music, and entertainment, joining creative professionals in business and finance, law, healthcare, and related fields. In a related article, Florida invokes Albert Einstein to give us some idea of the self-directed and creative individual. This type is becoming more numerous. Already, more than 40 million Americans work in the creative sector, which has grown by 20 million jobs since the 1980s. Some of these new Einsteins, it turns out, can be found working at Best Buy. Florida informs us that the Best Buy CEO, Brad Anderson, has made it his company's stated mission to provide an inclusive, innovative work environment designed to unleash the power of all of our people as they have fun while being the best. Adopting the role of spokesperson for the spokesperson, Florida continues. Employees are encouraged to improve upon the company's work processes and techniques in order to make the workplace more productive and enjoyable while increasing sales and profits. In many cases, a small change made on the sales room floor by a teenage sales rep reconceiving a Vonage display or an immigrant salesperson acting on a thought to increase outreach, advertising, and service to non English speaking communities has been implemented nationwide, generating hundreds of millions of dollars in added revenue. The Vonage display isn't merely altered, it is reconceived. Whatever survives this onslaught of intellectual rigor by the teenage sales rep is put back on the sales floor. In conceptual foundations clarified, the reconceived Vonage display, I think I'm pronouncing that correctly, generates hundreds of millions of dollars in added revenue. And so Florida continues. I'm sorry, I shouldn't laugh, but I am. Best Buy's Anderson likes to say that the great promise of the creative era is that for the first time in our history, the further development of our economic competitiveness hinges on the fuller development of human creative capabilities. In other words, our economic success increasingly turns on harnessing the creative talents of each and every human being. Frank Levy, the MIT economist, responds to this by dryly noting that where I live, Best Buy seems to be starting people at about $8 an hour. Florida is unimpressed by such facts. After all, the stated mission of Best Buy's CEO is to provide a work environment designed to unleash the power of all our people as they have fun while being the best. It seems the unleashed power of all these mavericks in the Best Buy creative sector is fully compatible with near minimum wage. Bohemians live by a different set of rules. They aren't money grubbing proles. They have fun while being the best, these aristocrats of the spirit. Florida presents the image of an immigrant salesperson acting on a thought. Are we to believe these teenagers and immigrants working at Best Buy have reclaimed the unity of thought and action of the pre-industrial craftsman or of the gentleman inventor? Florida seems to think there has been a wholesale overthrow of the centralization of thinking that is the hallmark of industrial capitalism. Robert Jackal offers a more plausible account of the role these teenage and immigrant Einsteins are playing at Best Buy. Based on hundreds of hours of interviews with corporate managers, he concludes that one of the principles of contemporary management is to push details down and pull credit up. That is, avoid making decisions because they could damage your career, but then spin cover stories after the fact that interpret positive outcomes to your credit. To this end, upper management deals only with abstractions, not operational details. If things go well, finding cross marketing synergies in the telecommunications and consumer electronics divisions has improved our strategic outlook heading into the fourth quarter. And if things go badly, change the Vonage display? That was the kid's idea. What's his name? Bapu or something, or Jesus, those immigrants. Where Jackal sees managerial ass covering, Florida sees a magical bubbling up of people power, harnessing the creative talents of each and every human being. And so Florida writes the creative content of many working class and service class jobs is growing. A prime example being the continuous improvement programs on many factory floors, which call online workers to contribute ideas as well to their physical labor. Braverman was familiar with this style of management, characterized by a studied pretense of worker participation, a gracious liberality, and allowing the worker to adjust a machine, replace a light bulb, and to have the illusion of making decisions by choosing among fixed and limited alternatives designed by a management which deliberately leaves insignificant matters open to choice. Florida is not the first to see Einstein's everywhere he looks. In the early 1920s, the heyday of Taylorism, one true believer wrote that the modern factory is a field of experiment, constantly enlisting the worker in scientific research. And another wrote, Our entire civilization is a system of physics. The simplest worker is a physicist. This is like calling a particle physicist. Florida's contribution is to update our view of these mini Einsteins by taking a pop existentialist view of their creativity. It is a view that is familiar to most of us from kindergarten. Creativity is a mysterious capacity that lies in each of us and merely needs to be unleashed. Think finger painting. Creativity is what happens when people are liberated from the constraints of conventionality. According to this hippie theory, the personal grooming habits of Albert Einstein are highly significant. How else does one identify a bizarre maverick operating at the bohemian fringe? The truth, of course, is that creativity is a byproduct of mastery of the sort that is cultivated through long practice. It seems to be built up through submission. Think a musician practicing scales or Einstein learning tensor algebra. Identifying creativity with freedom harmonizes quite well with the culture of the new capitalism, in which the imperative of flexibility precludes dwelling in any task long enough to develop real competence. Such competence is the condition not only for genuine creativity, but for economic independence, such as the tradesman enjoys. So the liberationist ethic of what is sometimes called the 1968 generation perhaps paved the way for our increasing dependence. We're primed to respond to any invocation of the aesthetics of individuality. The rhetoric of freedom pleases our ears. The simulacrum of independent thought and action that goes by the name of creativity trips easily off the tongues of spokespeople for the corporate counterculture. This is totally describing Silicon Valley. Like, they have all of the hip words. I mean, they were known as disruptors. They would say, "We're here to disrupt," um, during the early onset of technology. I know that JP and I were recently talking about one of the characters on the All In podcast that was saying that, there's so much opportunity for creatives to use AI and reach new heights, when AI in itself, the very existence of it, is anti creative, anti human, anti life. So, just silliness. Um, So the rhetoric of freedom pleases our ears. The simulacrum of independent thought and action that goes by the name of creativity trips easily off the tongues of spokespeople for the corporate counterculture. And if we're not paying attention, such usage might influence our career plans. The term invokes our powerful tendency to narcissism, and in doing so, greases the skids into work that is not what we had hoped. So the tradesman as stoic. As against confused hopes for the transformation of work along emancipatory lines, we are recalled to the basic antagonism of economic life. Work is toilsome and necessarily serves someone else's interests. That's why you got paid. Thus, chastened, we may ask the proper question: what is it that we really want for a young person when we give him or her vocational advice? The only credible answer, it seems to me, is one that avoids utopianism while keeping an eye on the human good. Work that engages the human capacities as fully as possible. This humane and commonsensical answer goes against the central imperative of capitalism, which assiduously partitions thinking from doing. What is to be done? I offer no program, only an observation that might be of interest to anyone called upon to give guidance to the young. Um, so here we are in the 21st century. We are looking at the breakout of AI, artificial intelligence. We are looking at a culling or a scraping of human thoughts and interactions on social media in order to feed into language learning models that will then produce artificial intelligence. This is not this does not reflect this sentence. The only credible answer, it seems to me, is one that avoids utopianism while keeping an eye on the human good. Work that engages the human capacities as fully as possible. So you might have to get your hands dirty in the new world. If you don't want to be a part of the system that feeds into AI models, and you don't want your face used or your body or your words used for something that you never wanted them to be used for in the first place, then you are going to need to do something different. You're going to need to spend your time differently, um, something that's more human centered. Since manual work has been subject to routinization for over a century, the non-routinized manual work that remains outside the confines of the factory would seem to be resistance to much further routinization. There still appear developments around the margins. For example, in the last 20 years, prefabricated roof trusses and stairways have eliminated some of the more challenging elements from the jobs of framers who work for large tract developers, and pre-hung doors have done the same for finished carpenters generally, but still, the physical circumstances of the jobs performed by carpenters, plumbers, and auto mechanics vary too much for them to be executed by idiots. They require circumspection and adaptability. One feels like a man, not a cog in a machine. The trades are then a natural home for anyone who would live by his own powers, free not only of deadening abstraction, but also of the insidious hopes and rising insecurities that seem to be endemic to our current economic life. Freedom from hope and fear is the Stoic ideal. So, what advice should one give to a young person? If you have a natural bent for scholarship, if you are attracted to the most difficult books out of an urgent need, and can spare 4 years to devote yourself to them, go to college. In fact, approach college in the spirit of craftsmanship, going deep into liberal arts and sciences. But if this is not the case, if the thought of 4 more years sitting in a classroom makes your skin crawl, the good news is that you don't have to go through the motions and jump through the hoops for the sake of making a decent living. Even if you do go to college, learn a trade in the summers. So this is something that Europeans do, you know? I mean, I don't know if they still do it, and it's a broad statement I'm making. I'm, brushing with a broad stroke, but from what I understood, there's always a year that's taken off. Like if you're going to medical school, there's always a year that's taken off to maybe go to a patisserie enroll in a patisserie program, or learn some kind of trade, or even take painting classes, because you need that break. And then you can come back into your medical program, or your medical program with sort of a fresh set of eyes. Even if you do go to college, learn a trade in the summers. You're likely to be less damaged and quite possibly better paid as an independent tradesman than as a cubicle dwelling tender of information systems or low-level creative. To heed such advice would require a certain contrarian streak, as it entails rejecting a life course mapped out by others as obligatory and inevitable. That's it. And then you move on to being the master of your own, of one's own stuff. Okay, so I appreciate you sticking with me and listening to me read from this book, Shop Class as Soulcraft. I, again, highly recommend it. And I think that a lot of what's happening right now with the conversation around the visa programs that are bringing in certain types of workers, I think it's very relevant to what I just read. So we're looking at philosophical debates that are happening online. We are looking at individuals who we thought were aligned with um, human based values. I don't want to say just American based values, because I think that what people all over the world are looking for is something that is human centered and human motivated and human inspired. And we thought that, or many people thought, I never did, but many people thought that Musk and Ramaswamy and these Silicon Valley types that were, rushing into the MAGA camp, thought that they came from that place. And they don't. They don't come from that place at all. Um, and we're seeing cracks in their facade through this latest controversy. And controversy always happens in the middle of a transition, when you're transitioning from one government to another. So the Biden administration is out, the Trump administration is coming in, and during this in between process in this movement, there is always controversial messaging. There is always some sort of a controversy that comes up. And today, what came up was the visa programs and what they're really all about. So, so this is the last reading um, on Facebook and on the Meta brands. I will continue doing a Friday reading. I'll be on YouTube. I'll be on Rumble. I'll be on Rockfin. And I'm thinking that I might even be able to stream live on Substack. I'm not sure if I can do that. But either way, I always upload these live streams onto the various platforms that we have. So what I'll do is I will go ahead and put in the comment the link to all of the platforms where you can find us. And I will share the email address one more time. Let's see. There it is. Okay. And you guys can email me. Our decision to leave the Meta brands is partly personal, just better use of our time, partly because of their new contract and their new policy, where just by being on the page, you are agreeing to have your image and your thoughts and words and everything funneled into language learning models that will basically feed into artificial intelligence. And we're just, we have to draw the line somewhere. So one thing too, going back to the sort of the controversy with the Trump and Musk breakup or breakdown, is you have to remember that Musk comes from a time when his generation in that part of the world benefited greatly from apartheid. And, he's seems like through his behavior and through some of the things that he's done and some of the things that he's said, that he wants to incorporate that same kind of class structure into our government. And that is very scary to me and to a lot of people, and probably why Steve Bannon had to say, okay, let's, let's take a step back and let's move away from these jerks. I'm thinking that's what happened. And also, he is part of the PayPal mafia. And that's incredibly exploitive. That platform itself is very exploitive. It shouldn't even exist. So when people tell you who they are, believe them. And we're seeing his true colors. So that's good. I mean, I always knew that he was like that, but other people seemed really blinded, and they become Muscathants, I call them. So, all right. So it has been about a little over 90 minutes. So thank you for joining today. I will see you next Friday, just not on Facebook, but I will see you next Friday. But we will do one last broadcast on December 31st in a few days. It'll be during the day sometime, and we'll let people know on Facebook to say goodbye. And so if you want to come and be a part of the conversation, please join. And we would love to hear from you. Shoot me an email. We'll give you some details on how to reach us. And have a great rest of your weekend. And thank you so much for joining today. It was great to have you, and it was really great to read this book from this book, Shop Class as Soulcraft. Highly recommend it. Okay. All right. Have a good one. See you next week. Bye.